Imagine this. You're walking through Saqqara, this huge ancient Egyptian burial ground, right? And you come across this tomb. It's 4,400 years old. Inside, carved right into the walls, you see these two men, and they're not just standing there.
No, not at all. They're in this incredibly intimate embrace, so close their noses are touching.
Right, this nose-to-nose thing. Some scholars even call it a kiss.
Uh-uh.
And the really wild part, in Old Kingdom art, that specific pose, it's usually only ever shown between a husband and wife, exclusively.
Exactly. And that stunning image, which they found back in 1964, that's really the core of the whole puzzle surrounding the tomb, the Mastaba of Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep. It's just one of the most fascinating and frankly argued over discoveries.
Yeah.
This isn't just, slightly unusual. It's a major anomaly, structurally and visually, from the 5th dynasty around 2400 BCE. It basically forces us to rethink a lot of assumptions about ancient Egyptian life, about status, identity, and, well, intimacy on the path to the afterlife.
All right, so let's really unpack this. Because the stakes, well, they were eternal for these guys, literally. We're looking at a shared tomb for two really high-status men from the time of Pharaoh Nuser-Inini.
Mm-hmm.
And the puzzle isn't just that they shared a tomb, which was already pretty unusual if you weren't royal or married. It's that they deliberately used the specific visual language, the grammar, you could say, that was meant for a husband and wife.
That's the key. It seems so intentional. I mean, you just don't find anything else quite like it among non-royal tombs from that whole Old Kingdom period.
So how deliberate are we talking?
Well, you look at the whole package, the way the tomb is built, the way the figures are positioned, the inscription over the door, it all works together. It feels like a single, unified statement aimed at locking in a shared eternity.
Right. So our goal here in this deep dive is to get past the sort of, initial headlines and sensationalism.
Yeah, definitely.
We want to really look systematically at the evidence, the archaeology, the power dynamics involved, the architecture, this idea of eternal unity, and then tackle the different ways scholars have tried to explain it. The brothers theory, the twins theory, the couple theory.
We really want to understand what this relationship functioned as for them, for their society, and crucially for their afterlife. It seems like simply being friends or colleagues wasn't enough. Their bond had to be like the primary engine ensuring they both survive forever.
So we're going to explore how Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep basically engineered their shared eternity using the most powerful ritual tools, art, and architecture to define their partnership on their own terms.
Okay, so to really get why this tomb is so radical, so intentional, we first have to grasp just how important these two men were. Their status in that 5th dynasty society.
Right, because this wasn't some small hidden grave.
Not at all. Their Mastaba, it's located in a really prestigious spot in Saqqara North. That's the main burial ground for Memphis, remember. And they're right there alongside tombs of other top officials, even members of the royal family.
And the tomb itself just screams important, right? The size, the quality, the stone, the decorations.
Absolutely. It's incredibly elaborate. That tells you immediately, these guys weren't just wealthy. They had serious royal favor, direct backing from the top.
So this wasn't some secret they were trying to hide. It was a very public statement.
Exactly. A public declaration of their standing, placed right in the most sacred, most visible part of the necropolis. It's kind of amazing it survived, actually. It was partly buried later under the causeway for King Unis's pyramid.
Wow. So its survival almost underlines how significant it must have been originally.
Yeah, I think so. The location, the size, the fact that it lasted, it all points to one thing. Whatever this relationship was, it wasn't hidden. It had official approval, sanctioned from Pharaoh Nuser-Dionys's administration.
Which they would have needed, right? You couldn't just go around breaking the rules of funerary art without permission.
No way. No amount of personal money would let you deviate that much from the established norms without the king's okay.
Okay, so that brings us to their jobs, which is kind of fascinatingly weird to us now. Their main shared title was
Overseer of the Manicurists in the palace of King Nuser-Ini.
Manicurists. It sounds so trivial, like getting your nails done.
Right. But you have to shift your thinking entirely. Back then, 2400 BCE, that title meant something extraordinary.
How so?
Well, think about it. The pharaoh was seen as a god, a divine being, actually touching the king's sacred body. That was restricted to an absolute inner circle.
Okay, so these guys were allowed physical contact.
Highly privileged physical contact, whether it was nails, hair, applying oils. It wasn't just grooming, it was about ritual purity, preparation. These men were intimately involved in the king's daily sacred routine.
Literally touching the living god. that changes things. That kind of closeness, that physical intimacy with the divine king, it must have given them a unique kind of power.
Definitely. It put them in this boundary space, between the sacred royal world and the rest of the elite. It wasn't about managing paperwork. It was about ritual access and total trust.
And that closeness, that trust, that's the key to understanding the tomb.
It's the social currency, yeah.
Yeah.
Some scholars argue that this professional intimacy, plus their high status, gave them a kind of social latitude.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning they might have operated slightly outside the really rigid social rules that applied to other elites. They were so essential to the king personally, maybe they had more freedom to define their own relationship publicly.
Okay, wait. Let's clarify the job title a bit. Overseers of the Manicurists. Did that cover other things too, like barbers or cleansers?
The term used, earthy sen, seems to cover a range of personal attendants involved in the king's physical care. The fact they shared the exact same main title suggests they worked very closely together, maybe simultaneously or taking turns.
So their work lives were completely intertwined.
Deeply intertwined, yeah. Around the most private, sensitive aspects of palace life. That creates an intense professional bond, a kind of parity that we then see reflected in their tomb.
So that social latitude you mentioned, that's like their permission slip. Their high position let them make this unconventional public statement about their private bond in a way someone lower down couldn't dream of.
If the pharaoh approved the monument and trusted the men, who's going to argue with how they chose to represent their relationship for eternity?
And it wasn't just high status, it was equal status, right?
Yeah.
That's important too.
Crucial. The tomb inscriptions hammer this home. They both also held the title Royal Confidants or Privy Counselor. They were equals.
Which rules out any idea that one was the boss and the other was like his assistant.
Completely. It rules out any master-servant dynamic, any hierarchy within their pairing.
And that equality had to be shown in the tomb for the afterlife. They weren't just powerful colleagues, they were equals heading into eternity together on the same level.
Right, so this very public display of an unconventional equal partnership was as much about power as it was about affection. It set them up for a joint, non-hierarchical eternity.
So they had the status, they had the royal backing, and they used it to basically bend the rules of tomb building.
They did. They didn't just build two tombs next to each other, they created a single, unified complex. The whole structure is designed for them to, quote, cohabit in perpetuity.
Cohabit in perpetuity. That phrase itself is striking, especially for two men who weren't married in the traditional sense.
It's highly unusual for non-royal, non-married individuals. The architecture itself makes the statement.
So how does that unity show up in the actual layout? You said it's not just a big tomb, it's integrated specifically for them.
Right. It's a clever balance between acknowledging they are two separate people, but emphasizing their unity. Take the offering chapel, for instance. You've got two false doors carved into the west wall.
Okay, false doors, those are like the portals for offerings, where the living interact with the dead, right?
Exactly. They're essential ritual points.
But why two doors if the goal is unity? Wouldn't one door make more sense?
But you need to, because Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep are still two individual souls. Each needs their own distinct access point for the rituals, for the offerings, for their individual identity to be maintained for the afterlife. That's critical.
Okay, so two souls, two doors, but how does the unity come in?
Well, look where they put them. These two separate doors are placed right next to each other, immediately in front of the serdab.
The serdab, remind us what that is and why its location matters here.
The serdab is basically a sealed room inside the mastaba. It's where they place the statues of the deceased. These statues acted as a kind of backup body, a safe place for the life force to reside if the actual mummy was damaged.
Got it. So placing the two distinct false doors right together, leading towards this shared spiritual home, the serdab.
It visually connects them.
Yeah.
You have two separate entry points for ritual, acknowledging their individuality, but they lead immediately into this single integrated space representing their shared spiritual existence. The separation is instantly overcome by the unity of their final home.
That's a really powerful architectural message. Two people, one shared spiritual house. But you said there's even stronger evidence in how they got to their burial chamber.
Oh, absolutely.
Huh.
This is maybe the most compelling structural point, the way they access their actual final resting places. The burial chambers themselves are plain, undecorated, which is pretty standard for the time.
Oh.
But they are reached via one single sloping tunnel. That tunnel starts in the open courtyard of their unified mastaba structure.
Wow. So literally they share the exact same physical path to get to their sarcophagi, to their eternal resting place.
Yes, that physical merging of their path to eternity directly mirrors the physical closeness and intimacy we see depicted in the reliefs in the public parts of the tomb.
So the architecture is making the same point as the art. They are joined. This shared tunnel is basically declaring a shared eternal destiny.
It has to be seen that way. Remember, the whole point of Old Kingdom afterlife beliefs was securing that continuity, making sure the offerings kept coming. The tomb was your eternal house, and it had to function properly.
And usually that function was guaranteed by the husband-wife relationship, right? Ensuring the family line continued to make offerings.
Exactly. The survival of your Kai depended on it. So by building this unified structure, dedicating it entirely to their partnership, Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep were essentially setting up their bond as the primary ritually valid unit for receiving those eternal supplies.
Okay, so the building itself subtly conveys this unity through shared spaces and tunnels. But then there's the text over the entrance, the epitaph. That's not subtle at all, is it?
Not in the slightest. It's the most unambiguous statement about their bond, carved right there on the entrance architrave for everyone to see. It's the declaration of intent, set in stone.
And what does it say?
It says simply and incredibly powerfully, joined in life and joined in death.
Wow, just straightforward like that. Applied to two men, not a husband and wife. That feels revolutionary for 4,400 years ago.
In the context of Old Kingdom belief, it's a massive theological and ritual statement. They are explicitly saying that this specific bond, their partnership, is the most important relationship for their eternal survival. It comes before everything else.
Above their ties to their own families, their children, even their important jobs.
Above all other earthly ties, yes. That linguistic statement confirms what the art and architecture suggest. Their shared existence is the fundamental unit for their eternity.
So in a culture that seems obsessed with order and tradition, they're basically telling the gods, the priests, everyone, look, this relationship, us two together, this is the non-negotiable foundation of our afterlife.
Pretty much. I mean, the architrave does also list their individual accomplishments. Niankhkhnum as confidant of the king, Khnumhotep honored by the great god, things like that. But that unifying phrase, joined in life and joined in death, sets the primary theme. They're equating their bond with the highest level of necessity and permanence. They co-opted the language of eternal devotion for their unique situation.
All right, let's move into the really debated territory. The pictures, the iconography. To really get why their choices were so radical, we probably need a quick reminder of the standard rules, the visual conventions everyone back then would have understood.
Yeah, that's crucial. Old Kingdom funerary art wasn't random. It operated with a very precise visual language, almost like grammar. It was meant to clearly show status and relationships.
And certain poses meant specific things.
Absolutely. If you saw specific intimate gestures, figures embracing, holding hands, and especially that nose-to-nose contact, it was instantly recognizable. It signified the conjugal bond, the husband and wife relationship.
And this wasn't just decorative, right? It had a function.
A vital function. Visually documenting that domestic partnership was seen as necessary to activate the tomb's ability to provide for the deceased eternally. It ensured the continuity needed for the afterlife cult.
Okay, so that's the baseline. Husband-wife poses signal the core eternal unit, but Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep's tomb just throws that rule book out the window, repeatedly.
It does. It consciously uses this specific marital vocabulary, but applies it to two men. And we have to assume this wasn't some mistake by the artists. Given their status and the tune's quality, this was a calculated high-level decision.
Why would they do that? Why take that risk?
Well, the argument is it comes back to function. They needed their pairing, whatever it was exactly, to fulfill the job of the eternal partnership. They needed to look like a ritually effective unit to get the afterlife benefits associated with one.
They needed to look like a married couple to get the perks of being a married couple in the afterlife.
Essentially, yes. So let's look at the specifics. We see them embracing, holding hands, which is already pretty unusual for two men who aren't related as, say, father and son in very specific contexts. But the two most famous scenes go much further. Tell us about the banquet scene first.
Okay, the banquet scene. This isn't just a picture of them having a nice meal, is it?
No. It represents the crucial afterlife provisioning table. It shows the deceased in their ideal eternal state, receiving food and drink forever. And in this scene, Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep are sitting side by side, which is normal enough for important people. But the details are where it gets really specific.
Whitetails.
Their legs are overlapping under the table, and their arms are draped around each other's shoulders in a very close embrace.
Overlapping legs. Why is that such a big deal?
Because scholars who've studied hundreds of these tombs say that specific configuration, the legs intertwined like that, the close shoulder embrace, the offering table, it was only used for married couples in this period. Full stop.
Really? Exclusively?
Exclusively. It's visual shorthand. It symbolizes their intimacy, their interwoven destiny, the fact that they are a single, ritually unified domestic unit for eternity. You just don't see brothers or friends depicted like that.
So, sitting at the eternal dinner table, they're visually coded as husband and wife. They're saying, ritually speaking, we are the couple receiving these offerings together.
That's the interpretation, yes. And then, of course, there's the most famous image of all, the kiss, the nose-to-nose contact.
Which is about as intimate as Egyptian art gets, right?
Pretty much. It signifies shared breath, shared life force. It's profoundly intimate. And scholars like Greg Reeder point to this as prime evidence that the visual language used for Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep was, and I quote him here, most closely aligned to that used to portray conjugal sentiment.
So the argument isn't just, oh, they were close friends. It's that they deliberately chose the specific artistic form that meant marriage to show how close they were.
Exactly. They needed the ritual function of the husband-wife partnership for their afterlife goals. And they used the only visual language available, the Marital iconography, to claim that function. It looks like a deliberate rhetorical move to perform the role of a conjugal pair for the afterlife cult. They were staking a claim.
And wasn't there another subtle detail, something about a flower?
Ah, yes. The lotus blossom. This adds another layer of complexity, maybe showing just how deep the intentionality went.
What's the story there?
In one scene, Khnumhotep, one of the two men, is shown smelling a lotus blossom. Now, the lotus is a powerful symbol in Egyptian art, representing rebirth, rejuvenation.
Okay.
But importantly, in funerary art, smelling the lotus is an act often associated with women, particularly the wife, in domestic or offering scenes. It often signifies the receptive aspect of the partnership.
Wait, so if they're using marriage imagery, and one of them, Khnumhotep, takes on a visual cue typically associated with the female role within that married couple, what does that imply?
Well, it could suggest they were consciously assigning roles within their own pairing to mirror the traditional male-female dynamic needed for the ritual to work. They're mapping the necessary duality, maybe active provider and receptive partner, onto two male bodies.
That goes way beyond just showing affection, doesn't it?
It really does. It supports the idea that they conceived of themselves as a functionally conjugal unit. It might even hint at some kind of conscious adoption of gendered roles within their specific relationship, which is, a whole other level of complexity beyond just friendship.
So it wasn't just copying the poses of marriage. It seems like they might have been adapting the functional rules of marriage, too, to make sure their eternal setup was successful.
Now, we have to address the big elephant in the room, the main challenge to reading this as a straightforward couple. Both Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep actually had wives.
Right. The tomb inscriptions list them. Niankhkhnum was married to a woman named Khentekores, and Khnumhotep's wife was Kinat. And they had children, too.
Yes. So the immediate question is, if they had wives and families, fulfilling those traditional elite roles, why does the most important artwork in their shared eternal home focus so intensely on the bond between the two men?
How do supporters of the couple idea explain that?
The key seems to be how these wives are actually shown in the tomb, or rather how they're downplayed.
Downplayed how?
Well, they are present because acknowledging the family line, the children who would likely maintain the tomb cult, was probably socially and ritually necessary, but they are consistently pushed to the margins.
Margins how? Like smaller figures, less
Right.
prominent places.
Both. They're often depicted much smaller than the two men, which in Egyptian art usually signals lesser importance. They're placed in secondary positions in the scenes, or sometimes they're completely left out of the most intimate depictions of Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep, like the banquet scene or the embraces.
So visually, they're demoted. They're footnotes to the main story, which is the relationship between the two men. That's the complete opposite of how a primary wife is usually shown in her husband's tomb, right?
Exactly. Usually, the wife is prominent, often nearly equal in size, shown intimately with her husband. Here, the visual hierarchy is clear. The male-male partnership is primary. The wives are secondary. This looks like a deliberate ritual demotion.
Elevating their own bond by visually sidelining the traditional family structure.
It certainly looked that way. They seem to be functionally replacing the standard heterosexual unit with their own partnership as the main focus for eternity. But the most startling piece of evidence, the one that really suggests an active choice against the heterosexual norm, happened later.
Okay, this is where it goes beyond just marginalizing them in the original design.
Yes. We move from just placing them in secondary roles to an act of active physical erasure.
Erasure? What happened?
The sources, the archaeological reports, detail that in one specific scene, the image of Khnumhotep's wife, Knut, was almost completely plastered over, smeared with gypsum.
Wow. Plastered over. That's not accidental damage.
No way. That takes effort. And crucially, the evidence suggests this was done while the tomb was still being used, still open for the offering cult. This wasn't decay. It was a conscious, probably ritualistic act carried out by someone, maybe the priest, maybe the surviving partner, maybe the family.
Okay, hold on. Why would they do that? Was it an attack on the wife herself, like trying to curse her? Or was it about redefining the main relationship in the tomb?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The general consensus among scholars who focus on this is that it was likely done to purify or clarify the intended eternal relationship after the initial construction.
After Khnumhotep died, perhaps.
Possibly. If we assume Khnumhotep died first, then maybe Niankhkhnum, or the priest responsible for the tomb's upkeep, thought that Knut's image visually contradicted or interfered with the primary eternal partnership they wanted to emphasize, the one between the two men.
So they literally wiped her out of the picture, ritually speaking, to make sure everyone understood that the Niankhkhnum-Khnumhotep bond was the one that truly mattered for eternity.
That's how it looks. This act is incredibly strong evidence for the conjugal model, or at least for the absolute primacy of the male-male bond. It shows that this bond was meant to supersede the traditional marriage tie, ritually replacing it as the vital unit for their afterlife.
Why else would you physically erase the wife's image unless her presence somehow challenged the main point the tomb was trying to make?
Exactly. It suggests a deliberate post-construction effort to reinforce the tomb's core message about the two men's shared eternal destiny.
Yeah, that detail makes it really, really hard to just say, oh, they were just brothers who were really close.
It does. Brothers don't typically erase their sister-in-law's picture to solidify their own eternal bond. This act points to something much more central, much more functionally significant about the relationship between Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep.
Okay, so this brings us right into the middle of the big scholarly fight, doesn't it? You've got these hard facts, the shared tomb, the marriage poses, the erased wife, but they clash with what traditional Egyptology often expects or assumes.
Absolutely. The debate really boils down to a conflict between what the tomb seems to be explicitly doing using conjugal art for a function and what some scholars think the nature of the relationship must have been, based on biology or kinship.
And you mentioned earlier this idea of methodological biases or heteronormativity playing a role.
Yeah, that's a concept often brought up, particularly by gender archaeologists. It's the tendency, historically, in archaeology and history, to kind of explain away evidence that looks queer or non-traditional.
How so?
If something doesn't fit the expected heterosexual model, the default explanation often jumps to the closest acceptable family tie, like brothers or father and son, even if the evidence, like the specific artwork here, doesn't really fit that explanation perfectly.
Okay, so let's look at the main hypotheses. The first one, the fallback, was hypothesis A. They were just brothers or close relatives.
Right. This was the initial interpretation back in the 60s when the tomb was found, proposed by excavators like Ahmed Musa and Hartwig Altenmuller. They suggested they were brothers, maybe father and son, and all that intimacy, the embracing, was just, filial affection.
What was their reasoning?
It partly relied on interpreting some of the lesser titles in the tomb as possibly being inherited, suggesting a family link. And, well, it avoided the uncomfortable implications of the marital art.
But as we've discussed, that explanation seems insufficient now.
It really struggles to account for the key evidence. Firstly, as we said, the specific intimate poses the nose-to-nose kiss. The overlapping legs are just unparalleled for brothers or any other non-conjugal pair. You have tons of tombs showing brothers they don't look like this.
Okay.
Secondly, it doesn't fully explain the absolute equality in their main titles and status, which again isn't typical even for brothers. And thirdly, maybe most importantly, it offers zero explanation for why someone would later erase one of the wives. That points to a conflict or priority issue, not just brotherly love.
Right, so the simplest explanation just doesn't cover the facts, which leads to a more recent and quite intriguing idea. Hypothesis B, the twin model.
Yes, this has been proposed more recently by scholars like Lynn Evans and Anthony Woods. They suggest Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep might have been identical twins. perhaps even conjoined twins.
Conjoined twins. Wow, what's the evidence for that?
Proponents of this theory point to a lot of decorative symmetry and visual doubling throughout the tomb's artwork. They see numerous instances where figures or design elements seem paired up or mirrored.
Mirrored images.
Yeah, like visual puns almost, hinting at their identical nature, their biological unity as twins or geminates. They argue this unique biological bond would explain the need for such extreme closeness, the shared tomb, maybe even the exaggerated affection. It arises from them being fundamentally a single unit.
Okay, that's interesting. It does account for the intense unity and maybe some of the unusual art style.
It does offer a compelling explanation for the symmetry and the shared destiny aspect, but it runs into its own problem.
Which is,
Even if they were twins, biologically inseparable, why did they choose to express that unique bond using the specific visual language of marriage?
right.
Why use the nose-to-nose kiss and the overlapping legs, symbols reserved for husband and wife, to show they were twins? There were other ways to show kinship or professional bonds. Why invent this completely unprecedented artistic step unless they were specifically trying to tap into the ritual function and benefits associated with the conjugal unit?
So the twin theory explains the unity, but not necessarily the specific method they use to express it in the art. Which brings us back to hypothesis C, the conjugal model, or same-sex partnership idea.
Exactly. This view, supported by Egyptologists and gender theorists like Greg Reeder and Thomas Dowson, basically says, look, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, if the art uses the exact vocabulary of marriage and seems designed to achieve the eternal benefits of marriage, maybe we should consider that it functioned as a conjugal unit.
It's kind of an Occam's razor argument for the ritual function.
Pretty much. The evidence stacks up.
Yeah.
The unambiguous use of marital poses, the deliberate downplaying and then active erasure of the wives. It all points towards their bond being structured to ritually replace the traditional marriage as the primary unit for eternity.
So if they were just twins, why erase the wife? If they were just brothers, why use the sacred kiss pose?
The conjugal model argues that their relationship was intentionally set up to be the most important one, the one that guaranteed their eternal survival together. And the fact that Pharaoh seemingly approved this suggests that, at least for these incredibly high-status individuals fulfilling the functional needs of the afterlife unity, provision might have been more important than sticking to traditional gender roles for the couple.
It's clear why the debate is so fierce. This tomb really forces the field to grapple with its own assumptions. But regardless of whether they were twins who were also partners or just two men whose bond demanded the language of marriage, the key point is they prioritized their relationship for eternity.
Okay, so if we're seriously considering the possibility of a same-sex partnership here, we need to place it in context. How did ancient Egypt generally view same-sex acts? Because we can't just assume it was totally fine.
That's a really important point. And the textual evidence we have is, well, it's sparse and often kind of negative, isn't it?
It is. The few mentions we have of male-male sexual activity often frame it in terms of aggression, dominance, or chaos, not mutual affection.
Like the famous story of Horus and Seth.
Exactly. In the myth, The Contendings of Horus and Seth, Seth tries to sexually assault Horus. It's clearly portrayed as an act of domination, an attempt to humiliate and subordinate his rival. It's definitely not presented as a loving relationship. That suggests certain kinds of male-male sex acts, especially those involving force or implying dominance, were seen very negatively, associated with disorder.
And then there's the religious angle from the texts about the afterlife itself.
Right. You look at the Book of the Dead, specifically chapter 125, the negative confession. This is the list of sins the deceased person has to swear they didn't commit to be judged worthy of the afterlife.
And what's on that list, besides things like murder and theft?
Well, among the denials is the phrase, "I have not committed acts of impurity," followed sometimes by a more specific line like, "Neither have I lain with men."
Lain with men. That sounds like a pretty clear moral condemnation.
It certainly implies it, yeah.
So wait, if you had to deny lying with men to get into the perfect afterlife, how on earth could Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep build this incredibly public, expensive, elaborate tomb celebrating their intimate bond? Wouldn't the tomb itself basically disqualify them from passing the final judgment?
This is where their incredibly high status and maybe a more nuanced understanding of that prohibition becomes absolutely critical.
How so?
Many scholars argue that the phrase lying with men in the negative confession might not have been a blanket ban on all same-sex intimacy. Instead, it might have specifically condemned taking the passive or penetrative role in male sex.
Ah, okay. Why that distinction?
Because in many ancient cultures, including potentially Egypt, being sexually penetrated as a man could imply subordination, a loss of status, powerlessness. Think back to Seth trying to dominate Horus. The shame wasn't necessarily the act itself, but the loss of power and dignity associated with being the passive partner.
Okay, so the taboo might have been more about hierarchy and degradation than about the genders involved.
That's a strong possibility. Now think about Niankhkhnum and Khnumhotep again. Everything about their tomb emphasizes their equality. Their equal titles, their shared duties, the symmetrical art. There's zero indication, visually or textually, that one partner was subordinate to the other.
So because their relationship was presented as one between equals, it might have fallen outside the scope of that specific moral condemnation, which was focused on passive subordination.
Exactly. Their high status and their demonstrated parity could have exempted their bond from the kind of judgment aimed at unequal or aggressive encounters. Theirs wasn't master-servant or victim-aggressor. It was presented as a partnership of equals.
And the fact the pharaoh okayed the tomb is the ultimate proof of that distinction.
It strongly suggests it. The existence of this mastaba, built with royal approval, implies a potential difference in how society viewed things. Maybe low status or aggressive same-sex behavior was condemned by the moral code, but a high-status, reciprocal, publicly sanctioned partnership like this was acceptable, perhaps even admirable.
Their status, their connection to the king, their wealth, it acted like a shield, almost, allowing them to define their own domestic reality in a way that met the afterlife's functional requirements, unity and provision, even if it bent the usual gender rules.
That seems to be the most logical, functional conclusion. For the ancient Egyptians, preparing for eternity, ensuring the tomb worked, ensuring the Ka survived, was paramount. The functional integrity of the eternal unit mattered most.
So their ability to successfully adopt the visual language of marriage showed that their specific, high-status relationship structure was deemed ritually effective. It could get the job done, ensuring their shared eternal destiny, perhaps sidestepping or overriding stricter moral views on specific acts because the overall goal of successful eternity was achieved. #outro. So where does all this leave us? We've got this incredible tomb, clear evidence of marriage art used for two men, the deliberate erasure of a wife, hints of biological pairing like twins. It feels like the debate isn't going to be settled easily, is it?
Probably not definitively. The tomb sits right at that intersection of hard archaeological evidence and how we, today, try to interpret it through our own lenses.
Yeah, and maybe the relationship itself just doesn't fit neatly into our modern boxes.
Exactly. It might have been a unique blend of things: deep professional partnership, profound friendship, a necessary ritual arrangement for eternity, maybe romantic love and intimacy too. Trying to slap a single label on it might miss the point.
What we know for sure is that, for them, this bond was the primary one, the one that mattered most for their eternal future.
Absolutely. And regardless of the exact nature of their feelings or biology, whether they were lovers or twins or both or something else entirely, this mastaba is undeniable proof of something extraordinary. It's key historical evidence.
And it forces Egyptology and history in general to really look hard at those built-in assumptions, that tendency to explain away evidence that doesn't fit the neat, traditional narrative of a purely heterosexual past.
Definitely. What strikes me most is just the sheer boldness of it. The deliberate choice they made, using the highest forms of art and architecture backed by the king to make this statement about their relationship etched in stone forever.
They had the power, the status, and they used it to define their own eternity.
Yeah. And that final statement connected right back to where we started, carved over the entrance.
Yeah.
It just says it all, doesn't it? It cuts through all the debate about labels.
Joined in life and joined in death.
That's their legacy. Two men who found a way, using the most sacred tools available to ensure they would face eternity together.
Mm-hmm.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
How so?
It makes you wonder if you could design your own eternal monument today, your own legacy. What relationship in your life, maybe it's romantic, maybe it's family, maybe it's a deep friendship, maybe even a professional partnership. What bond would you choose to put front and center above all others for all eternity?